All right. Well, thank you everybody very much for being here tonight. Appreciate it very, very much. A presentation here with Tho Bishop from the Mises Institute. So I'm sure you guys are probably familiar with Tho if you've been in the Austrian economics world for any period of time. He does a ton of stuff with the Mises Institute, with their podcasts and everything like that. He really recently just finished up the series with Patrick Newman on YouTube talking about his book Cronyism. Really, really enjoyed that. And yeah, excited to hear from Tho Bishop tonight. You have the floor.
I appreciate it, and hopefully we're doing more with Patrick on some of the history stuff. We gotta work out since it's gonna be a while for his next book to come out. We're still working on exactly how to structure the next history podcast we're doing, but hopefully by the time I see him at Mises U, we'll have that all worked out. But again, I've been very impressed by just the quality of the Discord server. Again, it's always great to see young talent getting serious about the ideas. I miss the good old days of the rationally sought privet seminar on Facebook and all the great memes that came about with that. But I'm very privileged to have I think one of the best jobs in the world, being able to just kind of be a popular commentator of Austrian economics for the Mises Institute. We've been having a lot of fun with our podcast products out there. Some of the animated videos that we've been doing the last year and a half and so. We'll have, I think next week, we'll be releasing the 9th video for the What Has Government Done to Our Money animated series, which has been a lot of fun. We've got some great response from that. My background a little bit, for those who may not be familiar, I'm very much a product of the Mises Institute. I myself am a college dropout. Never had a particularly big interest in economics really until the Ron Paul 2008 campaign, which obviously coincided with a great financial crisis and kind of a recognition that so much time being interested in the dark side of politics, coming to recognize just how little the people in charge really understood, leading down to some fun rabbit holes, such as learning that Peter Schiff was right. All of the great predictions of Ron Paul. I myself, someone that was, working in a coffee shop up here in Panama City, just reading Mises dailies and the blog for quite a long time. And then having the opportunity after the kind of Tea Party wave took over in 2010 of going up into DC and kind of being within the belly of the beast, not working for Ron Paul directly, but working for the House Financial Services Committee, thanks to a campaign contact I had with a congressman from Birmingham named Spencer Backus. And so from that position, I was able to work kind of behind the scenes, being sort of the Austrian mole, if you will, kind of trying to use that position every way I could to kind of get Austrian ideas out there amongst other Hill staffers, particularly my age, but sometimes even a little bit older. I remember back in the day, it was a fun time going out to happy hours with coworkers, and then after a few beers, having them try to grill me on the gold standard and why gold was not simply a barbaric relic that should be ignored. After that, 2015 was able to join after Jeff Dice took over. He reached out looking for some more communication staffers, and so I've been working with the Institute since March of 2015, which it's quite crazy how time can fly. I can't believe that was over 7 years now. But within the Institute, it's been a lot of fun seeing all the different sides of what the Mises Institute really has to offer, which is not only the content and the website-facing side, being a part of editing and soliciting content on that side, producing some of it myself, but to me, the best part of my job is being able to get to know the young scholars that have come through our programs. You don't always see it. They're not always, because of the restrictions that come with, trying to play the academic game. You don't always see some of the young rising talent come throughout, but we've got an incredible group of scholars within the Austrian tradition, many of which are based in Europe, based in Brazil, based really around the world. And one of the great joys that I've had is be able to build I think some really good relationships with the next generation of Austrian economists, if you will, and trying to help provide feedback and insight into how do we take this environment right now where so much of the economic conversation going on right now is not happening within academic journals, right? It's not happening within the official confines of academia. Sometimes if you have a grand idea that can be very helpful to the regime, something like modern monetary theory, it's easy to kind of fast track and kind of take some shortcuts into getting heterodox ideas out there in front of very official publications. Obviously, as Austrians, we don't quite get to enjoy some of the perks that come with that dynamic. When our entire role in things is sort of telling the state exactly what it can't do, and often upsetting a lot of the people that are the ones that have access to giving out all the economic grants and things like that. And so we're in this very interesting dynamic, right, where we have ideas that have a tremendous influence. I think something really to say within where we are right now as a civilization, not only in the U.S. but globally, where if you're a young scholar affiliated with the Mises Institute, that's not necessarily a benefit, right? And in many ways, it's explicitly a slight against you. And so, how do we, as an institution, how are we able to continue to attract young talent when being a Austrian, particularly of the Mises Institute Auburn strain, is not an advantage to your career? And that's something that I've had some very long conversations with some of the young talent within our ranks about sort of those difficulties. I see the great profile from Dr. Jonathan Newman in the room, someone who is doing some great stuff in Bryan College and producing. It's one of the best assets we have is that I think Austrians, perhaps a little bit of influence from David Gordon there, but Austrians tend to have a better sense of humor than many other economists, particularly within the non-Auburn branch of things. Anyone who has engaged George Selgin on Twitter can see perhaps a difference in personalities between some folks like Bob Murphy and other folks that are so desperate for credibility amongst very serious people within the Beltway. And so that's one of the things that I've been able to just stumble into, being the position that I've had within the Institute, is just trying to help figure out how can we maximize this very very interesting intellectual moment of memes and humor and all Twitter and things like that, and how can we weaponize these forces in a way to really amplify the very important messages we have in spite of those hostile currents. And that's kind of the project, more than anything else, that I've come to really that I take pride in. Sometimes I can definitely do better at times than others, but that to me is the real dynamic. If we're talking about broadly speaking, what is the future of Austrian economics? I don't think the future comes from converting some of the old institutions that have been so powerful within promoting economic thought. I don't think those are ever going to be open to us. What we have to do is demonstrate our value and demonstrate our ability to educate normal people. And of course, this has always been, I think, kind of baked into the DNA of the Mises Institute. I mean, Lou Rockwell is an absolute hero. The fact that we've been able to have for 40 years now an institute dedicated to such a niche topic as a very reformed, a very strict adherence to that sort of Misesian economic line. That's not always the sexiest thing to pitch to, Coke outlets, right? Like, that's not the sexiest thing to pitch to boomers that, saw Glenn Beck on a chalkboard talking about George Soros at times, to really kind of recognize why building up the infrastructure, appreciating the true intricacies of the history of ideas, right? Understanding why Salerno's dehomogenization debates with Hayekians matter. And, one avenue you can go there, right, is to try to water it down. It's to try to broaden your brand as broadly as possible to the extent that you really stand for nothing at all. I think that within the libertarian movement, like some of the bastions that have propped up the intellectual side of libertarianism in the past, I think we've kind of seen how many, again, otherwise good people, it's easy to bash, with libertarian infighting, it's always very, very easy to kind of get libertarians to insult other libertarians. I sometimes fall in that trap. I try not to, for those that don't deserve it. But it's very easy to kind of fall in the trap of watering down the ideas. And I think that's one thing the Mises Institute has always avoided doing, trying to stay relevant as time frames and news cycles change, but never losing sight that ultimately what we are trying to do is build off the shoulders of giants, right? We're not trying to hijack news cycles and to go about what is trending. We're instead trying to amplify and understand why individuals, even those that don't necessarily want to become economic PhDs and professors within the current environment of academia, how can we maintain and educate and expand the ideas that ultimately Ludwig von Mises was promoting, Murray Rothbard promoting, people like within the current day and age, people like Joseph Salerno, like Jeff Herbner, like David Gordon. How do we make these very high-minded ideas maintain their relevance within particularly the crazy political winds that we find ourselves in? And again, that's why anyone here, if your goal is to be a PhD scholar, not only within necessarily economics per se, or simply just interested in diving deeper within the intellectual environment, I think that the Mises Institute has something very uniquely built here, where we have the opportunity not only within what the Mises Wire provides as a kind of a popular outlet for getting ideas out there, where they themselves might be syndicated and everything spanning from InfoWars to Epoch Times to Business Insider to we can run the gambit in terms of the respectable outlets. My stuff has been featured everywhere from Bloomberg to InfoWars, right? So that's a very broad gambit in terms of audiences that you can reach through the Institute. But also simply providing a platform where, while the Quarterly Journal of Austrian Economics is not necessarily the highest ranking journal in all academia, though very useful for European scholars, I've learned. We've had a lot of European scholars that have used the QJAE for their dissertations and some of their publishing requirements. If you're an American scholar, you don't quite get those same perks. But how do we build up these platforms where they might not matter as much within the isolated Ivy towers of higher ed, but what you will know is that if you publish in the QJAE, your academic journal is going to be read more often than publishing in much higher economic journals out there, right? And then that goes to, I think, the beauty of the people that are attracted to what Mises.org provides, attracted to what the Mises Institute publishes, those that genuinely want to better develop their understanding of the world as it really exists, that really cares about these ideas. They are willing to see past the bunk of the modern Western credentialing process and instead actually care for genuine, sincere intellectual debate and dialogue. And these are the matters that I think, to me, there's I think very few institutions, even broadly defined within various different fields, that the Mises Institute provides that sort of platform. And again, for the fact that I've been able to have the opportunity the last few years being able to address Mises U audience, talking about things like populism, using some of the audience that I've been able to have just associated with the Institute and writing for the Institute, talking about the paleo-libertarianism of Murray Rothbard, right? Some of these, it's very interesting the degree to which some of these very online dissident right environments, if you dive down into the real intellectual kernels that have been influential there, whether it's Curtis Yarvin or Nick Land or some of these other people, often there's been an overlap with Austro-Libertarianism within the Misesian fold. And I always find it funny where you have certain people, certain scholars within the Austrian label or the mainline label, depending on what they want to use, within kind of high-minded libertarianism as itself as a unique sort of political discipline. The Institute way of doing things can kind of get pot shots here and there, and yet at the end of the day, the fact that Hans Hermann Hoppe, who is a scholar, who hasn't really engaged, outside of kind of events where he himself is kind of held up, still these people in Reason Magazine or Cato or some of these other institutions still fetish, they still can't help taking pot shots, right, at Hans Hermann Hoppe. That itself is a reflection of the degree to which there's something about the way that we're able to deliver ideas, the way how far out of we have something interesting to say, And that is the environment that, again, I certainly can't take credit for it. Something that's pre-existed me having any sort of official role with the Institute. But it's something that I've come to really appreciate, being behind the scenes of things. And, that's why, when I see groups like the Austrian Economics Discord server and just the kind of spontaneous organization, really at its core, right? It's people just genuinely motivated to read large books and to write multi-thousand thousand-word articles, which we don't always love for the wire, but we love for a serious intellectual work. That dynamic, that sort of weaponization of heterodox ideas within this modern world, to me, I think that is ultimately one of the most important things that we have on our shoulders as being, people living in 2022 that care about these ideas. How do we maximize our impact? Ultimately, if we are not focused on that, then we're missing out, because this is a time where I think we're seeing really around the world a lot of the intellectual foundations upon which a lot of assumptions have been made are failing, right? We're seeing, I think, really right now, this very interesting check to, the post-Cold War New World Order, right? Neoliberalism, or whatever you want, globalism, whatever the catchphrase you're most comfortable with added. The governing philosophy of the society is not working, and people are recognizing it's not working. The amount of faith and trust that we placed into experts, whether it be at the central bank or public health bureaus or dictating energy policies, it's been robbing from us. It has been driving nations off a cliff, and I think this instability is here to last for quite a while. Obviously, we're dealing with 10 plus, 12 plus years, right, of absolutely insane monetary policy that is, I think, really manifesting itself in all sorts of ways. And I think that one of the reasons why I find myself so attracted and engaging in, let's call it, popular political discourse, willing to engage in things like, trying to understand the significance of the Trump movement within America, understanding why Boris Johnson failed in a way that, I would argue Trump didn't, understanding why you see the surge of, kind of right-wing nationalism, not only within Europe, but within, South America and other nations, within this sort of moment of instability. People are looking for answers, and they're looking for ways to better understand, how to protect their families and their communities. And, it is very easy to kind of try to stay aloof from all of that, particularly as libertarians, if the answer is simply, oh, well, this world that we have shouldn't exist, and therefore come back to me when we're living in a void that we can kind of build up from our own ideas. I think that now more than ever, we have a great opportunity to take and package the scholars who have a great deal to say about protecting, preserving, and empowering civilization, and bring it down to a level where normal people can digest. And I remember, it's been fun over the years seeing the experiences, talking with particularly young students from South America who they talked about how their exposure to some of these ideas were purely through memes, right? And that's something that's always kind of stuck with me. That it doesn't matter if you get people through the door. Not everyone's going to go. Not everyone's going to be reading through old copies of the Review of Austrian Economics or the Journal of Libertarian Studies, right? Like that itself is a very self-filtering mechanism for the cream of a crop. And again, if you're here, spending your Friday evening or wherever you are in the world, listening to me, that itself is also a kind of self-filtering mechanism. None of us here are normal. But what we can do is we can take what makes us unique, which doesn't necessarily make us better, but it makes us unique. And how do we find ways of convincing our neighbors and our friends and people who are otherwise very smart and very capable in all sorts of ways within human society needs? How do we say the big truths that need to be said? How do we how do we undermine that anatomy of the state that relies so much on the perception of legitimacy and the perception of expertise and human rights and all these things that liberals like to talk about, right? And how do we expose the current system for what it is, and then beyond that, identify ways in which we can build something better, build something that is legitimate, build something that actually can improve the quality of life for those people closer to us. And there's a lot of things there that we're not always perfect at what we do. We can always have room for improvements, and I think that is a necessary part of it requires, I think, a good humility not to get kind of too wrapped up in the status quo, never to become too content that, oh well, we've got our web traffic hasn't dropped over the last 6 years, so that really we mean something. That itself is kind of confirmation on what we're doing is working. I want to see something more than that. I want to see these ideas actually alter the way that the future itself is written in my country personally, or at least my state. But I want to see that replicated elsewhere. And so that's the sort of stuff that I've been having a lot of fun doing within the Institute. That's the sort of stuff that really motivates me as much as I enjoy, reading Rothbard and Mises still to this day. And then that's the beauty of it too, is that, I think when you, to me, the most important book within the Mises collection or the Mises bookstore, it's not Human Action, it's not Theory of Money and Credit, it's not anything Rothbard wrote. It is the biography of Ludwig von Mises. It's the life story of the scholars that we are inspired by. Because as great as important as ideas are, and obviously, Ludwig von Mises is understanding of the way that ideas shape history, that is itself, I think, secondary to the people that hold the banners of those ideas. It's the example that they set. It's the work that they're willing to put into. And whether it is Ludwig von Mises and the influence that he had on, Austria throughout some very tumultuous years, and the intellectual movement that he was able to bring with him when he had to flee Europe and bring back to the install in the U.S., or whether it's just picturing Murray Rothbard hanging out with a bunch of smelly leftists during the late 60s, because that's the only area that he could find an environment to talk about the evils of the warfare state and the dangers of the growing American empire, right? These are men that put in the work beyond simply thinking, in an armchair, and are willing to put it into practice. And that's a dynamic that I find incredibly inspiring. And I think one of the things that I've come to particularly appreciate within the last few years is the degree to which we need Austrian thinking, Austrian scholarship, not simply within the narrow confines of economics, but within all the social sciences. We need Austrian revisionism within history to kind of build off the shoulders of Ralph Rako and some of the great historians that we've had in our past. Building off of the political work, where I think some of the most nuanced and misunderstood parts of Ludwig von Mises' own intellectual career, some of his own political additions, say nothing of Rothbard's ever engaging, sometimes changing political strategies of things. And so that's one thing that as well I want to encourage any young, curious, intellectually minded people out there, is that there's so many ways in which the framework that a Mises or Rothbard or Hoppe have to offer, they really do. I think some of the biggest gains that we can make right now, particularly within the current structure of academia, is within social sciences broadly, and so that's kind of a few different angles there. Again, trying to cultivate within the Institute the next generation of Austrian scholars, my own personal fascinations in the way that I try to direct my content, and just where I see the kind of battlegrounds of ideas, the way that they've evolved over time, and the way that I think Austrians have a responsibility to optimize what we can provide to any degree possible. And so that's kind of an opening sort of broad thing there. If you want me to go further on any particular topic, I'm happy to do so. But I didn't know if you had perhaps more questions or anything like that.
Yeah, we screened some questions ahead of time for you, so I can go and start with those if you want me to.
Okay, sure.
All right. So, first question here is, what is any advice that you might give to someone who wants to have a career as an economist?
Yeah. So, and I think the biggest thing is to find a topic where you have something unique to say, and I think particularly a big topic. I think that there's two ways of kind of playing the, again, and I say this as the least qualified person at the Institute to give career academic advice, and I say that up front. But from being, kind of an observer and engaging with young scholars trying to figure out this question in their own right. What I have come to see as kind of the two different strategies, right, is that one, you can kind of get through a PhD with sort of a traditional program. You can kind of carve out a let's call it kind of a boring little niche that kind of can get you through, and you get that piece of paper, and then you can find yourself hopefully within a position within an institution that is okay to let you kind of let your freak flag fly a little bit. I know within the U.S. in particular, some of our scholars have had particular success within Christian colleges and universities because the institute, since we're not part of the Koch network, we don't have quite the same sort of benefits that a kind of, let's call it the traditional Mason approach has, and trying to get plugged into, one of the Koch-funded economic research centers, which gives you a little bit of financial sort of backing in a way that the institute can't offer, will never offer, right? And so that is one way of playing it, and I've seen that done to a great extent. We've got some great teachers out there within colleges. Many of them become great faculty members for Mises University, and so one way of building that is kind of you build up a persona within our ecosystem, and again, I think one of the cool things is that the degree to which we've seen our scholars kind of readily take on very much sort of an entrepreneurial model, whether it's a Tom Woods or a Bob Murphy or people like that. There is a model that I think is existing out there right now that's only growing with sort of the entrepreneurial academic model, where you can kind of elevate yourself, working with outside of the traditional publications and things like that, and kind of build a brand. And I think that's one of the things the Institute can offer for scholars that come through our programs, is helping, for those that want it, build up a brand through our sort of popular channels, right? And so I think that's one way of doing it, and there's a lot of good people that have had success with that. I think there's another dynamic, though, where, again, particularly with the issues that we're seeing right now, right, where the degree to which credit expansion, beyond even simply kind of looking at money supply charts and things like that. You always get the great Fred charts of like, oh, M2 supply has gone crazy, right? The issues and some of the more nuanced details of how the modern financial system amplifies credit expansion. I think that's an environment where even within, let's call it respectable outlets, there is a opportunity for Austrian-minded scholars to really set a mark there. We've had some people that have done this to various levels of mainstream success. I always butcher his first name. We called him Ark when he was there, but Arkadiusz Simeon, who's a Polish economist, great guy. If you guys haven't read his paper on shadow banking and its impact on business cycle theory, that I highly recommend it, everyone here. It's a fascinating paper, and what it does is it's taking kind of the underlying understandings, right, of the role that increases of fiduciary media play in business cycles, and brings it simply into some of the modern innovations that exist within modern financial markets. David Howden has done some great work on this as well, kind of looking at some specifics of ECB policy and some of the ways that banking and financial regulation has changed since the 2008 crisis, right? Vitas, his last name escapes me at the moment. He is a Lithuanian scholar. He is a Guido Holzmann. A lot of the people within this sort of framework often come from Guido Holzmann's program in Angers. He's tried to create some kind of new sort of measurements about quality of money, kind of just creating some kind of easy sort of measurements there. I think that if you look at certain countries, right, I think China, for example, the amount of credit expansion that you've had within the Chinese economy since 2008, I think that is a gold mine for Misesian thinking scholars to really take advantage of kind of applying these ideas to the Chinese economy, which if that melts down to the degree that I think it very well might, based off, again, the amount of unbacked credit expansion, that is going to quite possibly be the dominating economic issue for the next half century, right? so the other way is swing really big at trying to find some of these very sexy topics where the mainstream view of things is clearly insufficient, and go big and swing hard and put your stuff out there. And I think that you're seeing some stuff within non-Austrian economic circles that can have some complements to that. There's some very interesting work about shadow money and the way that American corporate debt was kind of being used as money substitutes for a while because of changes with Basel III Accords and the way that banks had to, the sort of collateral necessary for banks to kind of uphold by those sort of regulations. And what does that mean for, what does that kind of mean in the way that we understand things? I think that, you can also go kind of big, trying to go after the big financial issues as well. Now, that itself is going to probably require, perhaps an element of its own sort of form of entrepreneurship, right? You're going to need to be able to communicate, these sort of, trying to communicate your way in a way that can kind of get itself in the blogosphere, right? I think being, like it or not, I think that being good at Twitter, we've seen some very mediocre economic thinkers outshoot their CV based off of being pithy on Twitter, right? Why not us? Corey DeAngelis, who is himself a very much a Rothbardian-inspired scholar, a policy expert on the school choice stuff, he has turned himself to a situation where he might be the next Republican education secretary by being good at Twitter. And so again, that's that dynamic that I was getting at earlier, is that being able to engage within the popular intellectual environment. If you can nail that skill, then whatever path you want to go to, if you can be good at being pithy in the environments where people are having the real hot button sort of conversations, and then be able to back it up, like you have to be able to back it up too with the more in-depth articles or journal and publishing in journals or blogs or whatever. You need to back that up. But ultimately, it's being good at Twitter can be a major shortcut in saying things that really need to be said. And again, the other side of that is just being a very good teacher and being able to be a good, kind of second handler of ideas, and the impact that you can make by being a very good teacher should not be understated at all. And I'm not trying to dismiss that at all. We've got, I think a lot of our Mises Youth staff, our faculty, what they really excel at is teaching. And because of that, we've had, we've been able to continue to stock our pools with people interested in learning, reading 800-page books. But ultimately, it's if you are good at communicating original ideas that are relevant to the issues of the day, you'll find a way of being successful. And you can, if you want to go the Mason route, if you want to go the Guido Holzman route, go the international route. If you want to try to work your way and kind of be the Manchurian candidate way, I think that's all great. I think the worst avenue, though, is trying to specialize in a field where you're always going to have to be closeted, if you will. Right? If you're trying to pursue a niche where you can never really be yourself, I'm sure some people have had success with it. I think ultimately, though, that the incentive structures kind of bring you into certain ways that kind of get you outside of what at least that I would consider the good stuff. And so I think that's the one sort of avenue to avoid being. Don't think that you're clever enough to kind of fool everyone. But again, as long as you are willing to develop good communication and good ways of engaging with people, I think that itself that will put you far ahead than most of the people you're competing with. And again, we're always going to be at an uphill battle having the ideas that we have. And so we need every advantage that we can get.
All right, next question here is: are you hopeful for conservatives learning their economic lesson and realizing the importance of sound money, free trade, etc.?
I'm hopeful, but I'm also just someone that bets on myself. And so, to me, the way that I see my position right now is that when you think about the prior Austrian economic boom, right? It was peak 2011 Ron Paul, right? The Institute had Ron's office, and so we kind of had an unofficial political extension. Again, I say we. Obviously, I wasn't with the Institute at the time, but the Mises Institute had an unofficial political wing just by Ron Paul's outreach. We don't have that now. Unfortunately, there's really no political outfit within the libertarian movement, broadly speaking, that I trust either at this point. Yeah, a few years ago, I've had a lot more hope for Yale. I do not have that hope anymore. And so what I try to do is to interject Rothbardian, Misesian ideas into the burgeoning new right, populist right, nationalist right, whatever you want to call it, sentiment. And I've been very encouraged by the traction that I've been able to get. I've in the last year and a half, my work's been featured on Rush Limbaugh and Steve Bannon and Jenna Ellis, who was Trump's attorney during the election stuff. Who I have a much higher opinion of after being on our podcast than did prior to. It's funny how that stuff happens. But I think that there really is an opportunity there. And in particular, so the question is, what do we do with it, right? It's one thing to have sort of theoretical objections to the Fed's existence, right? But the question is, how can you package this in a way that a politician can run with? And it's not that we should value necessarily political action above all else, but it's that if you can get politicians around it, you're going to get a much broader audience than getting a very good scholar around it, right? And so the project that I have, my goal is between now and 2026 is to normalize within the American Republican Party abolishing taxes on gold, silver, and cryptocurrency within the as a plank of a populist agenda. Now, what that essentially is Ron Paul's old competing currency bill. And the beauty of it, and speaking to some of the staffers at the time, I don't think they ever fully appreciated just how beautiful this bill was. Because what this is that this is a 50+1 vote. What I mean by that is this is a tax bill that doesn't require 60 votes in the Senate. Now, in 2015, winter of 2015, I was up in D.C. Getting drinks with an old colleague of mine that used to work with the Financial Services Committee. And her boss at the time was George Selgin. And George Selgin complained to everyone that was listening, and I was listening. He didn't understand my Mises affiliation. He was complaining that if it wasn't for these damn gold bugs, we could get Republicans on board with rules-based monetary policy. And if it wasn't for these kooks, it'd be so easy. But the problem is that they think that they're selling out if they embrace common sense Fed reform. And the problem is, of course, is that and to be fair, they actually got the Republican-controlled House to pass a broad Fed reform that included audit the Fed and it required forcing the Fed to adopt a rule. The conservatives thought this rule would be the Taylor rule. The more practical thing was it was probably going to embrace NGB targeting, which is something that Janet Yellen has endorsed in the past that had kind of broader bipartisan support. The problem is, though, is that this required 60 votes. And the other side of it is that it assumes that the Fed's going to follow rules, which I think is kind of silly based off of the performance of central banks not only in the U.S., but abroad. But again, that requires 60 votes. This doesn't require 60 votes. This requires 50 votes, 51 votes. The beauty of it as well is that it is wonkish. It is small in the grand scheme of things. It's something that can be just stapled upon the next. When Republicans take over, right, we're not going to see some massive intellectual revolution within the American regime, right? As much as I love Governor DeSantis, I don't expect him to be passing through very, very intense, and we're going to reframe the American financial system along Misesian grounds. I don't have that hope. What Republicans are good at, though, is two things. One, giving money to the military, and two, passing tax cuts. Now, if you can get, let's say, 4 or 5, let's say Republicans have a 53-47 majority, right? If you have a 53-47 majority, all you need is to convince 4 Republicans that the next time Republicans pass a tax cut, that they won't pass that tax cut unless it has X, Y, and Z. This is leverage. And the thing is that Rand Paul had this leverage back in 2018. They needed every single Republican vote. As far as I know, Rand got nothing, which is some of my complaints about the way that his strategy is from time to time. You know who got something? Marco Rubio got something. Marco Rubio said, if you want my vote, we're going to double the child income tax credit. And because of that, we now have, that is now law of the land, and it's been in place there and probably will never go away. if you have 4 Republicans that are willing to put the line in the sand that in order for us to pass your, Paul Ryan GOP tax cut, you're going to eliminate taxes on gold, silver, and cryptocurrency so that we can preserve. You can defend this on 10th Amendment grounds, right? Because you got the Texas Gold Bank, you've had these little state initiatives on gold and silver, right? So you can defend it on boomer sort of 10th Amendment grounds, which are very good. I'm not dismissing that, but kind of boomer 10th Amendment grounds. You can defend it on technical innovation grounds, right? The federal regime is doing everything they can to stifle innovation within the crypto sphere. This is sort of cutting the Gordian knot there in a big way, so that America and not China is the leading innovator within cryptocurrency and shaping the way that financial innovation happens in the world, right? You can do it just simply on ideological grounds, right? A variety of different ways that you can go about this. If you get 4 senators to do it, then you've created the biggest hole within the Fed's control of the money supply that we've ever seen since we went off the gold standard. And if you're going to try to, and then if you think about it, okay, well, then how does this happen? Well, obviously, I mean, Rand Paul obviously will not do, we can't trust Rand Paul to do it by himself, but when forced when it actually comes to a vote, he's usually pretty good. We have Cynthia Loomis from Wyoming. I'm not going to comment on all of her proposed crypto legislation, but this is a woman who's a big fan of Seyfedin Mamous, another great Mises.org product, someone who takes the Bitcoin stuff very, very seriously. We might have, come next year, a guy named Blake Masters. Blake Masters, a product of the Thiel wing, Thiel himself. Eventually, I keep waiting for Peter Thiel to end up at Hoppa's event in Turkey. He was going to go in 2016 and bowed out because it became a Trump issue at the time. Blake Masters, I think, understands this stuff a lot more than most people do. I had a conversation with him. He claims to, and I always take these claims for what they are, but he claims to have read Human Action in high school. Now, Michelle Bachmann also claims to read Ludwig von Mises on the Beach, and I do not trust that necessarily. But if anyone's going to read Human Action in high school, I think Blake Masters is autistic enough to perhaps be on that table there. I did see him. He was taking pictures of a copy of Anatomy of the State at a political event that I was at, just to send with friends, right? So this is a guy that always, he's a lot more one of us than you would ever guess from watching, high budget political ads. And so that gives you 3 right there. And so then all you need is 1 more. Whether it's I think you can probably get a 4th there. I think there's enough now kind of interest in the Bitcoin orbit, but we'll see. And then it's kind of this interesting dynamic where the pressure on Republican politics actually benefits from a smaller margin than a big red wave. So that's kind of some of the fun strategy side there. But if let's say you start with those 3, that right there, you have something. And if you're able to get that done, I mean, you get Ron Paul's most powerful monetary policy bill slip through quiet within a bloated tax bill. And the beauty of it as well is that it's one of those tax bills, to me, this is the way I sell it to, say, generic populists. This is a tax cut that would remove money from Wall Street and reward gold bugs who are overwhelmingly conservative, Bitcoin people, where we are far better represented than Wall Street. There's very much sort of a reward friends and punish enemies dynamic to this, which I think that there's an element on the right that appreciates that. And so that is my long-term project there, where I think there is an opportunity, perhaps whether or not they appreciate the true beauty of markets in the way that a Misesian or Rothbardian or even Hayekian would understand. I don't know if we're ever going to get quite to that point, but I think that we can use the dynamics and the distrust of global elites in a way that we can get systemic changes to what we need to be. Because again, the biggest issue is that trying to convince Republicans that the problems with inflation are not simply what we feel at the gas pump. It's not simply how we feel when we're buying steaks at the grocery store, but that they're taking our money and rewarding the trans woke folks, right? They are stealing from us and giving to our enemies. That hits conservatives that will never read Human Action in a way that's a little bit different than trying to argue for free market policies and sort of kind of other arguments. And so I'm very optimistic, but I'm betting on my own ability to kind of make some of those arguments out there.
All right, next question here is very much a loaded question, so I'll let you answer this however you wish. But they ask, why is Samuel Edward Conklin III the best Austro-Libertarian writer?
Well, what I do appreciate is his, his creativity, his ability to think outside the box, and his way of trying to propose something that people can act in their daily lives in a way that leads them to love closer by their values. So again, I think agorism is a great micro strategy. Right? I've got nothing against an agorist out there. It requires a sort of commitment that I don't know if I can ever convince my wife to necessarily get into. I think that sort of framework is best helped with a kind of a broader strategy, a more macro strategy, if you will. But I've got nothing against the agorists out there. I enjoy a good, fat Conklin meme as good as anyone, but I'm not going to dismiss anyone that wants to live by their principles. And I think ultimately agorism at its best is people living by their principles. And I'm going to do nothing but tip my cat off to those people.
Okay, next question here is how hopeful are you for international libertarian prospects for change in light of events such as the Dutch farmer protests? And additionally, what role should foreign libertarians play?
I think first and foremost is I think international libertarianism kind of needs to be wrapped up within sort of a nationalist sort of framework, right? I think that the same themes, and I'm not necessarily trying to paint absolute perspectives here. I'm not saying this a populist or nationalist strategy is always going to be the case in every area. In fact, there might be an argument where there might be a better technocratic approach in some countries where perhaps the academic system is less biased against us. But I think ultimately the intellectual bankruptcy of the current order provides incredible opportunities. But what it requires, though, is not simply the smartest people in the room. It requires not simply knowing a whole lot about economic theory. It requires being able to take these ideas and kind of interwove them into a way where you can communicate and you can politic with the masses. Now, again, if you're in Liechtenstein, if you're in an area with a monarchy, if you're in Thailand and you can convert the king, then hey, more power to you. I'm all in favor of an academic elitist approach if all it requires is convincing the mind of some head of state that isn't going anywhere in election season and doesn't have to worry about that. And if you can go that approach, then more power to you. I fully support. I think the Crown Prince of Thailand is doing schooling in Germany. My wife and I took our honeymoon there, and I was reading up on Thai politics at the time. Very fun. And I was like, oh man, if only we could get the Crown Prince of Thailand learning from Carl Friedrich Israel, a great young Austrian scholar, then we could make Thailand into truly a pinnacle of Austro-Libertarianism. Though the fact that you can buy bourbon from any 7-Eleven and there's constant religious shrines everywhere, where it's already far more Misesian, or at least Mises Institute culturally than many places in the West right now. If you can do that strategy, great. If you're not in that environment, though, I think a popular strategy is where it's at. And I think if you're looking for examples of people doing it in real time, Javier Milei in Argentina is someone who I find absolutely fascinating. I tip my cap to him. I have tremendous respect for what Elio Beltrão has been doing in Brazil, creating infrastructures that the Bolsonaro regime was able to kind of tap into when they needed to fill personnel spots. I think that is great. To the degree to which we can help shape some of these, far-right nationalist parties within Europe and et cetera, et cetera. Ultimately, we don't have to necessarily win democratic elections on a Misesian banner. All we need is to create institutions or to have scholars that have the networks that when you have a massive change in political dynamics, that they're going to be looked for and respected upon as experts within this new field, right? We need to create our own elites in countries that are facing crisis. And since there's countries, since many, just about all countries out there are facing crisis right now, I think that creates great opportunities. But that requires a skill set that's more than just simply economic theory. It requires a little bit of little It requires a little bit of communication. It requires of understanding, first and foremost. Again, we of all people should recognize that the value of a good, right, is not the objective value of the good. It's the subjective value of the good. So how do we translate this into what consumers want? And so if we get into the mind of what do political actors want to consume. And if we apply that, if we have individual talented people that can kind of just ground themselves into the unique environments and issues within, whatever your country is, I think that there is a land of opportunity. It's going to require a level of talent, and it's going to require a level of savvy. This can't simply, and that's something that's required more than reading an article. But again, if any of you out there are interested in playing this game, and I don't fault anyone that doesn't want to play that game. If you just want to be an economic scholar and perhaps inspire someone that might fill this void in the realm, nothing wrong with that either. But if any of you out there are interested in this line of thought, then please feel free to reach out to me on Twitter, email, whatever, and we can kind of dive into, what are the assets that you bring to the table? What's your sort of instincts here? Where do you think there's an opportunity there? And I love nothing more than kind of fleshing out sort of war game scenarios for this. And that's another one of the things I enjoy being at the Institute is being able to have these sort of conversations with all sorts of very ambitious, talented people from all around the world that are able to kind of feed in their own experiences to me.
And for our last question tonight here, we'll go and ask you, are you optimistic for the future?
I've never been more optimistic. And I think that is true within the United States. I can imagine worse timelines. Right? I can see ways in which this stuff goes wrong. I can see a way in which a lot of the institutions that I am optimistic about within, let's call it the American right, can go very, very bad. There is an element to, let's call it Tucker Carlson conservatism that can get very close to very bad and dangerous economic views very, very quickly. And so I am not blind to the dangers that come off when we kind of break down these norms. I think I'm not necessarily sort of a broad accelerationist by any degree, and I think there's dangers that can come from that. But I think within the American experience in particular, I think that the DeSantis model of having a strong executive that can kind of bring order to their state as the federal regime just continues to demonstrate how unserious it is. I think there's value in that as a model, and I think other states can follow that. And my hope, I would love to see nothing more. Make every governor a king, right? Like let's empower strong executives to have the power they need to fight back against what I see as the true enemy of the American people, which is kind of that beltway blob of not even really the politicians. To me, the politicians are the least of the matters. It's the administrative class, it's the media that does their PR. It's all, it's the bankers. It's that whole blob, that whole festering class. And I think ultimately it's going to require the power that really I think can only come from a strong executive in that regard. And I think that DeSantis, I'm doing everything I can to kind of get our ideas within his inner circle, and I think that creates a very unique opportunity. But even broader than just simply America, though, again, we've got two New World Order flunkies that have just bottomed out their times, that are leaving their governments, and Boris Johnson and Draghi in Italy. Boris Johnson, such a great disappointment. Back in the day, when he was getting praise on LouRockwell.com for his op-eds about not wanting to wear a helmet during the bike rides. That's the Bojo that I really miss. Huge missed opportunity there. I think South America, again, my broader sort of worldview is that right now I think Europe is a absolute toxic hellhole. I think that the European financial system is so much worse than as bad as the Fed has made America. Like I think Europe is even worse than that. I think there's going to be a lot of pain and chaos there before we get to anything better. I would like to see our people providing solutions within Europe going forward, but I think that's itself is a different issue. I have a lot more optimism in the short term, even within South America. Not all political elections down there have necessarily obviously trended our way. You got a lot of the commie running Peru and things like that. But what I find inspired by South America is the intellectual fortifications that have come up there. I tremendous. What the school, the tree that Gerardo de Soto has been able to build for himself in Madrid, I think is one of the great assets that we have as people that fight for these ideas. What Mises Brazil has been able to do within that country, I think is an inspiration. And again, if you end up having Milei become president of Argentina as someone who is a genuine intellectual within a kind of a Rothbardian tradition, I think these are all very, very promising things where I think in the short term, I don't think South America has to fall nearly as far as Europe does to get to where we need to be. And of course, within Asia, I'm, as I mentioned earlier, I'm very, very concerned about just, again, not even that necessarily the military consequences of China and Taiwan and that sort of dynamic, but the economic ramifications of a meltdown there, and just the spill-off effect there. But I think that, I'm always inspired by, we've got a lot of great young inspirational scholars within Korea, South Korea. They're doing a lot of great translation work. We've got some scholars in Japan that are trying to work the system there. I think globally, I believe in the value that Austrian ideas provide people and better understand the world. I think that while I myself, why have I not made more money? Right. Having this sort of Austrian, this is sort of conversation, this is sort of dynamic that I think plagues all Austrians, right? The old Mises quote that, I plan to study money, so I don't ever expect to have a lot of it. I myself could perhaps do better at trying to actually, benefit from, this knowledge I'm trying to claim that Austrian economics has to provide. But I think as long as our ideas are true, and I believe they are to be, as long as we attract talented people, and I believe you in this room and many others are talented people, history will provide itself opportunities for us to apply these ideas in a way that can make a meaningful difference. And so as long as we never get black-pilled, as long as we can build from the inspiration of those that came before us, as long as we can have in our heart, right, do not give in to evil, but proceed ever boldly against it, I can't help but be optimistic about the future.
Well, with that being said, thank you very much for being here for tonight. Enjoyed it very much.
Thank you for the invite, and again, thank you so much for the work that you're doing. Thank you for everyone that's been attending this, and your group, the Discord server, is again a tremendous inspiration, and just my hats off to you, all of you.
Absolutely. Before I let everyone go here, just one thing I want to plug real quick: the server.